Hello and welcome back, Realty Pros. Thank you all so much for joining us for another week of Realty Talk. And I am excited for today's Realty Talk. I'm excited that we have Mr. Glenn Donaldson of Velocity Title with us. And he is going to be sharing with us on all of the contract changes that we have recently seen. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to you, Glenn. And again, thank you so much for taking your time out to come and share with us.
Okay, good. And as typical in October, any of the changes that do come in get launched in early October. October 1st is when changes generally come around, whether those changes be legislatively, whether those changes be through the Maryland Real Estate Commission, or whether those changes be for contract edits, changes, amendments, what have you. And one of the first things I want to do here today is just sort of get a feel for whether or not everybody has actually seen and looked at and reviewed the new contract. So I know everybody's on a mute, but feel free to unmute yourself. Has everybody had an opportunity to review or look at the new contract?
I have had an opportunity to work with it.
Okay, good. Yeah, if you've got a couple of transactions in the works, you should be by statute now, by regulatory requirement, you should be using the new version of the contract, and whatever system, and I forget which system is being used at Porterhouse in terms of the document. So it was a dot loop or zip forms or whatever. Oh yeah, that's right, Brokerman. So yeah, they should have already updated the documents for you. So they should be in there and ready to go. So I think, Dee, it was you that indicated you've already used them. Have you had any challenges or any confusion in using it? Or have you deemed the contract sort of to be pretty easy to follow and, and work with?
Okay, so I was a little confused because some things have changed and like some of the addenda have not. So one of the things that I have had the opportunity to work with was the first-time home buyers, and I put it in the WhatsApp last night or the day before, one or the other, for our Realty Pros to see that the information for the first-time home buyers has changed. There's a section that you need to actually answer right in, I think it's paragraph 51. I'm not sure right now, but anyway, that talks about who they are. And the other thing that was confusing to me was how the inspection form has changed. It's very much streamlined. It's easier to use, but you have to know what it is that you want to do with inspections. So those were the two that I was tripping over most recently.
Yes. So okay, well that's great. And let's sort of jump right in. So Anita, if you don't mind putting up page 1 of the body of the contract, the residential contract of sale, the new version, and we can sort of look at this. And I'm not going to have those controls. So we can sort of look at this and then just start chipping away at it. But let's just talk for a second about the overall structure of the contract. I quite frankly think this is a better contract in its form, and some of the changes that were made in the language, particularly with respect to the as-is addendum, the home inspection. What's that?
I just wanted to make sure that everyone could see my shared screen.
I can, I'm
Yes.
not sure. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Okay,
Yes, I can see it.
okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
And then Anita, I'll just, as we go through, if you want to scroll down just a little bit, we can, you know, and then I'll just tell you, you know, where to stop. But right there is perfect to get us started. So, yeah, bring it back to, I'm probably got a little delay, so my apologies. But yeah, going up to number 1. So we're all
Can't
able.
see the full page.
There you go. Okay, so the general form itself has been broken up a little bit into sections, and there essentially are 7 sections. Not, and when I say sections, I mean basically they break up the contract. If you look up top, section 1, general contract provisions, right? And then we'll see later on section 2, section 3, section 4, all the way up through section 7. So what they've done is they've actually split the contract up a bit, which I think is appropriate, into these 7 sections to give the buyers and sellers and real estate professionals who are working with this contract sort of an overall ability to carve out what's needed in each different section. So if we're talking about section 1, general contract provisions, things haven't really changed drastically under the general contract provisions section. But what they've done is they've essentially encapsulated all of the contract provisions on pages 1 and 2 of the contract, which go through the date of the offer, time is of the essence, sellers, buyers, the property that's being purchased, the estate, as we know, that's the same, right? Be simple for ground rent properties, otherwise known as leasehold properties. And then you're going to enter, of course, the amounts. Purchase price, payment terms and deposits, that's all basically the same. So as you're beginning in these sections, section 1 is going to be general contract provisions. Then section 2 is going to get into payment of the purchase price, financing, those kinds of things that you're going to find on page 3, and we'll jump over there in just a second. There you go. And don't, you can go ahead and leave it there for a second. We're going to scroll back, but I do want to just encapsulate the title to each one of these sections. Section 3 is going to be property condition and inspections. We're going to touch on that a lot as far as the inspection addendums. The disclosures are section 4, which are property specific disclosures. And then of course the general disclosures required by either law or regulation. The transfer of title and closing is section 6. And finally in section 7 is going to be our breach of contract and dispute resolution, mediation in the event of a dispute, that kind of thing. So let's go back, if we could, to the first page at the very bottom, right there. And what you're going to be looking at, obviously, is the deposit, right? And settlement. All right. And this is a little off from the old contract, but it's a little more clarified, specifically with respect to the deposit. Remember, all deposits are required to be placed in escrow. A lot of people today are using electronic mediums to put these monies into an escrow with a title agency. The new rules are that title agencies can hold escrow deposits, not a problem. But if they do so, of course, there has to be an escrow agreement initiated by the title agency with the buyers and the sellers relating to disbursement of that deposit in the event that there is a a dispute between the parties, how that's gonna work. And it gets into that in greater detail here and identifies the section of the code that the Maryland Real Estate Code, right? 17505B of the Business Occupations and Professions article that's found obviously within the Maryland statutory code. And that's going to tell everybody exactly how this has got to be handled with respect to these deposits. It's not something necessarily that real estate professionals need to get into in great detail with your clients, but you should know exactly what the law says pertaining to that. So I don't, you know, I guess I would say more positively, I would recommend that you actually look up 17505B and just understand generally what the rules are with respect to these deposits. Then as we flow into section 11, or paragraph 11, I'm sorry. This is going to be differently located differently than the other one, and it's added a few things relating to the addenda and the disclosures, right? So I want to kind of run through these, you know, with respect to what has materially changed. And if you look at it, the affiliated business disclosure notice, that's normal. Additional as-is provisions. So let's talk about that. Does everybody remember and in what the old as-is provision addendum was relating to the property and what the buyers were doing? I guess let me put it a different way. Does anybody have any comment on the old version of the as-is addendum? Okay. If you remember the old as-is addendum, right, you had A or B that you could select. But what was happening, particularly in the time of the marketplace where properties were escalating, is you would have a buyer check off as is, and then they would have a home inspection, right? And the home inspection was marked for informational purposes only, property being sold as is, and then the buyers would find some problems and they would then start to renegotiate. And they would say to themselves, well, you know, we're going to renegotiate this and we want you to fix A, B, C, and D, okay? The Real Estate Commission had a problem with that. There was a number of different complaints relating to how real estate professionals were handling that issue, because it essentially put sellers into a position of renegotiating after they already had an as-is provision in their contracts. And the agents were essentially disregarding the as-is provision and renegotiating terms of the contract. So if you turn, and hold on, let me just find the new section.
Are you speaking of the as-is portion, the as-is addendum?
Yes. Yes. I have my copy here. I just want to pull it up. Okay. So, all right, I've got my copy here. Oh, thank you. Thank you. And back on the body of the contract, of course, section 3 covers property condition and inspections. And it talks about the as is, right? The property is sold as is. At settlement, the seller shall deliver possession of the property vacant, right? Clear of all trash and debris, broom clean, and in substantially the same condition as existed on the date of the contract acceptance. And then below in paragraph 26, and it's okay, you don't need to jump back to the actual contract. Anita, I'm going to jump right to the property inspection addendum in just a second. But the inspection contingency at paragraph 26 specifically now states that the buyer and seller agree. If the buyer and seller agree, the buyer will be afforded the opportunity at the buyer's sole cost and expense to condition, meaning make the contract contingent upon, right, the buyer's purchase of the property after inspection to ascertain any unsatisfactory conditions. So that's change in the language. Unsatisfactory conditions. What does that mean? Well, what that means is essentially what the Maryland Association of Realtors has done is change the property inspection and as-is provisions to be much more like a feasibility study that you might find in a commercial transaction, or a feasibility study that you might find in some land use contracts, right? Where somebody's going to develop the land and maybe build a small subdivision or a big residential a home on the property, and they want to do some sort of a feasibility to make sure they can get the proper permits, et cetera. So let me just discuss what a feasibility study is, contingency in a contract that you would write in. So if you had a buyer who was buying a piece of vacant land, you would want to have a feasibility study period in your contract as an addendum that specifically states the buyer has the right for a period of time, 60 days, 90 days, usually is the outside. In commercial transactions, it may be longer, but 60 to 90 days in residential, where the buyer has the right to do any and all inspections, whether that inspection is a physical inspection, whether that inspection relates to paperwork at the county, permitting at the county, authorizations that are necessary from any governmental agency in order to do the intended project that the buyer wants to do. Well, the Maryland Association of Realtors took that intent of feasibility studies and they really mirrored it in here. And they say the buyer may, if the parties agree, essentially get out of the contract for any unsatisfactory condition. That's broad as it could be, right? That covers anything and everything. So if you've got a contract that a buyer, and you're going to write a contract on behalf of your buyer, and you use the inspection contingency and the as-is provision, right? If you're a seller, you're going to use the as-is provision on the addendum, and if you're a buyer, you're going to use this property inspection addendum. You're going to want to give your buyer as much flexibility as possible. So, Anita, if I could, I know you have the as-is provision addendum, but do you have the property inspection addendum that you could jump to? Yep, there you go. Okay, so let's look at this. So now you're writing a contract and you've initialed at paragraph 26 in the body of the contract, you've initialed the inspection contingency. And your buyers have initialed that they intend to do the inspection. And there's, back in the body of the contract, of course, it says any buyer inspection contingency must be established through addendum to this contract, which means if you're writing this contract and you have a home inspection, a contingency, or you want one, you must, without question, use the property inspection addendum, or you have no contingency. So that's very different. You could have had a contingency stated in the body of the last contract for home inspection, not use the inspection addendum, even though that would have been a mistake, you still would have had a contingency for the home inspection within the time period specified. Here, this change says if you don't have this addendum, you have no home inspection contingency. So let's just go through it, right? Your home inspection contingency, paragraph 1 is you got to put in the timeline, right? Within what number of days? 7, 10 days usually is the outside. Most of the sellers are going to want to have a contingency period out there. I want to talk to everybody here in a few minutes and ask, with respect to this specific addendum and the market shift, the change in the marketplace, how's that impacting your transactions and what you're seeing. But we're going to put in, let's just say, 7 days into a contract acceptance period. So let me ask a question. In paragraph 1, going back to this body of the contract, so the buyers have signed on page 3 at the bottom of the page, paragraph 26, the inspection addendum attached, and they've initialed. And then you're using this addendum, but the date has been left out when the contract acceptance and home inspection must be done by, when that is. If that's left blank, do you have a contract?
No.
I think that was Angela, and you are correct. You
No.
don't have a contract. You don't have a material term defining time. Time is an absolute requirement in contracts. Specific terms, for instance, you cannot have a contract that has no price, right? It can't be enforced because if the parties have a contract for the purchase of a property at 123 Main Street, but there's no price, what's there to enforce? The buyer says it's $2 and the seller says 200,000. Same rule applies with times certain, dates certain. If you have no date for when a contingency period is to be enforced, then you have no term, and the courts will strike the contract or strike the provision depending upon its materiality to the contract. So here, a home inspection is a very material term, wouldn't you say, to a contract? Your buyers want it, and the sellers want to have it done and resolved if there's anything to handle within the period of time. So never leave a blank in this contract. If it calls for a number of days, make sure you've put it in there. Number of days are going to be 7. Now the big changes down in section 1A.
A question very quickly, Glenn. So this is kind of relative to, I guess, what the start date would be for your property inspection, but sometimes in an offer, as far as they'll say the settlement date is. So they'll say maybe within 30 days of a ratified contract. So does that should we have a definite date there, or is that okay to accept that? Because once it's ratified, then that's when the dates start, except that there's really not a true date in that
Yeah,
blank.
that's a great question, Anita. So I always recommend to have an actual date certain, but the rule is if the date is reasonably ascertainable, then it binds the parties. So if you say, I want settlement on December 31st, and you put that in the contract, that's a date certain, right? Everybody knows exactly when it happens. Now, your example is settlement to be 30 days after ratification. And so that is reasonably ascertainable because we all know the date that the parties signed the agreement. And since the final signature is effective ratification of the contract, then based on that, you have a reasonably ascertainable settlement date. The contract would be considered in full force and effect and valid. It's a great question. The reason I'd like a date certain in those spots is because there are lawyers who litigate the word ratification. And what they say is that ratification doesn't occur until after all contingencies have been expired. So you may have a contingency for financing. And so they'll argue that the financing contingency, was in the contract till the, December 30th, and you guys were thinking you were going to go to settlement on the 31st of December, but ratification, when all contingencies were resolved, didn't occur till the 30th. So now you have till January 30th to settle. They'll make that argument. In court, I have successfully argued against that position, but heck, who wants to go to court to enforce the sale? You've already blown through all of your dates if you have to go to court. So by having an actual date certain, it's clearer and more definitive. By having just a period when 7 days after the signature of this last signature of a buyer or seller, that's a reasonably ascertainable, so the court's going to enforce it. Does that make sense?
Yes, Glennis, I have a question. This is Aurelia.
Hi, Aurelia. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I just wanted to ask, is that a benefit for the seller or for the buyer? Because for the buyer, it sounds like a benefit just to put the 7 days, especially if it extends out. Now, if you're on the seller side, then you should be countering that to put a specific date. Is that correct?
So yes, it likely is correct, except for you want to make sure, right, that if you're going to have some flexibility in that contract, it depends on the actual issue. Are we talking about, say, a home inspection? Or are we talking about settlement? So in your example, Aurelia, what did you have in mind? Are you thinking, say, for the inspection period?
Yes, I was thinking specifically for the inspection period, because we were on the as is
Right.
portion of what you were talking about.
Yeah, if you want to give your buyers some additional flexibility on that, you could do that. The one thing I'd want to steer you away from is getting into a position where you're not sure when the final date of the home inspection is required to be completed. The way the contract is written, it says number of days, right? It says within blank days. You would have to rewrite that a little bit if you were going to put a number of days past the last signature. And that might get a little bit confusing to the parties, but your thinking is correct. it would be more beneficial for the buyer as opposed to the seller in this example. So did that answer your
Thank you.
question?
Yes, it did. Thanks.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, good. All right. So the next big change, of course, is at section 1A, where now the scope and limitations of the inspections are clearly spelled out, right? And it says the purpose of the inspection selected below is condition and performance of the above systems and components, but they're not warranted by the seller and are not considered, right, subject to this addendum. The inspections are not for purposes of making items of routine maintenance and or cosmetic nature the subject of further negotiations. That is their attempt to address that issue we talked about earlier in the old as-is provision on the inspection addendums, where buyers were coming in and saying, oh, well, we have this or that, the refrigerator's too old or the roof is getting close to old, and so we want the sellers to make repairs, even though as is was checked off in the contract. So this language with a big bold, you see it right there. I don't know if you, I can't put my little cursor on there. There you go. Big, bold, all capital, not for the purpose of making items of routine maintenance or cosmetic nature subject to further negotiations between the buyer and the seller. So can any of you guys think of an example of what they're really referring to by way of routine maintenance? And I'll let anybody, I'll give you a second and then I'll give you what might be an example. So in thinking about transactions that you've had, does anybody have an example of what you might consider a routine maintenance item or a cosmetic nature?
Maybe the annual or the routine maintenance of the HVAC.
Perfect. That's exactly where I was going to go with it. The HVAC system, right? Maybe it's 8 years old, 9 years old, and it has routine maintenance requirements to it. Maybe it needs to be cleaned. Maybe there's some rust in the system. That does not mean it is not working properly, but it may mean that the inspector is going to note it in their report. They're going to say, hey, you know, this, I would recommend having the HVAC system cleaned. Well, I see rust in the heat exchanger unit. Well, so before what was happening was the buyer's agent might come back to buyers with the buyer's, you know, recommendation. I want to get this fixed because that sounds bad. And, you know, I don't want to have a rusted heat exchanger on my furnace. What does that do for me if it blows up, you know, 30 days after I buy the house? I want the seller to fix that. No, that was not the intent of the as-is, you know, of the as-is provision. So here they've clarified that. Hang tight, guys. Sorry, I apologize. I've got a court case going on and I'm getting a text. Let me just respond. So here they've clarified that, and they've said that the inspections are not for purposes of making those renegotiated items. So if you're dealing with buyers, you got to clarify that to your buyers. The contract and the intent of the contract is clear. These items are going to be for generally informational purposes only, unless it's specified that they could be repaired. So let's talk about that. There's a list now, right? And in this list, you've got structural and mechanical, you've got mold, environmental, radon, chimney inspection, lead-based paint inspection, wood destroying insects, and any additional inspections. And you would put, let's just say there, so let's just say you put wood destroying insects. Okay. You've checked, you're going to have your buyer's initial wood destroying insects and go and just kind of scroll back up a little bit, back to A. Okay. So you see the language here in A that says the purpose of the inspections selected below is to discover unsatisfactory conditions. See that? And if you go back, right, and you look at inspection contingency on paragraph 26 of the body of the contract, it says if the buyer and seller agree, of course, this is what this property inspection addendum is being used for, the buyer will be afforded the opportunity at their expense to make this, to condition or make the property contract contingent upon the buyer's purchase of the property upon inspections to ascertain any unsatisfactory condition to the buyer. So what the contract is now saying is they're using the body of the contract and this inspection addendum, and the buyer, if they check any of these boxes here, will be able to just say, I want out. I didn't like it. They did a wood destroying insect inspection and I didn't like the results. It's unsatisfactory. I'm out. You've got to explain this to your sellers and you've got to know for your buyers what it means. What they're saying by writing this and changing these addendums is that buyers will have an opportunity to look at these items, any of them, and for any reason they can just walk. They do not have to give the seller an opportunity to cure or fix or anything else. Section 8 says additional inspections, right? So if you scroll down just below section 8 a little bit, Anita. Okay, there you go, right there. Whoop, back up a bit. I want to look at that box there on number 8. Additional inspections, and it gives you a line to write something in. So one of the things, of course, is going to be, and it says it right there, buyer's right to inspect and or test well and or septic systems, water quality, etc. Those are going to be handled by different addendum. So what is going in number 8 is a full home inspection. So you would put there, and I would write this down, any additional items noted by a home inspector on the home inspection report. Let me know if anybody needs that language again.
Could you repeat it, please, Donald?
Yeah. Any additional items noted by the home inspector on the home inspection report. Thank you, Angela. I see it. Yeah. Any additional items noted by a home inspector on the home inspection report. Okay, perfect. I would ask Anita and Jasmine if they could make sure that, I know there's not everybody is not on this meeting today for this contract, but this is really, really important to your contracts and your buyers. By adding, if you scroll back up to just a little bit, Anita, just for section 1 through 8 there. Yeah, okay. So you see the structural, mechanical, the mold, environmental, radon, chimney inspection. That's not everything that a home inspector can find, right? There's other items that can come into play in a home inspection. So what we really want to do by adding this language for our buyers is give them the flexibility. Now, if you're representing a seller, of course, it's a different concern, but for today's purposes, we're talking about for your buyers. The flexibility of getting a home inspection report and being able to look at the report in its totality, everything, including the items listed in 1 through 7. And then by adding the language on 8, it includes every other item a home inspector may find. All right. And then if you don't have that, and your home inspector comes back with some item that your buyers don't like, but it's not in that home inspection report is not included here, your buyer's going to look to you and say, well, what do you mean I can't get out of the contract? I don't like this. The sellers don't have to fix it, and I don't like this issue, and I can't get out without losing my deposit, and the seller has no obligation to fix it. So this is really important to add that provision to section 8. Now it brings in everything for your buyer from the home inspection. Does anybody have any questions on that issue? Doesn't seem like. Does everybody understand fully what we've done here, taking paragraph 26, home inspection, in the body of the contract, tying it to the inspection addendum, and then adding on paragraph 8 or line 8 there, the full home inspection report? Everybody understand that? Just go, yes, 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 yes. That's critically important. All right.
I have one question.
Sure. Yes, Darlene.
So what I recently saw is one of these forms that come through, and the only thing that they had checked off, the buyer had checked off, was the structural and mechanical.
Okay. Then what they've done by doing that, they have limited the home inspection to buyer and mechanical, or structural and mechanical.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
And so might as well not, I mean, for it's the rest of the home inspection is informational purposes only. That's it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. So let's scroll down to page 2 of this addendum. I mean, I didn't mean to cut anybody else off. Did anybody else have any questions on that or points they wanted to bring up? Okay. So here we have now, we've included in section 8, the additional inspection, additional matters from a home inspection report. And now that's come back, and section B talks about what the parties' rights are. So right up front, if a right to terminate for the buyer, if the results of an inspection are unsatisfactory to the buyer. Now, that doesn't say if the air conditioning unit is not working. It says It's changed the contractual obligations of the parties from the old contract. It's not in working order. It's saying if the item is unsatisfactory to the buyer in any way, it may be working perfectly, but they don't like that the home inspector put that the HVAC unit has rust in the heat exchanger, because that may be an indication that the heat exchanger is only going to last another year, and it's, you know, $1,500 to get a new heat exchanger or whatever. So the contract now says the buyer may terminate the contract unilaterally, period, full stop. Let's just stop right there. If the inspection says on page 1 of this addendum that the inspection is to be done within 7 days, the notice of right to terminate, if the buyer sends the seller the notice of right to terminate unilaterally within the 7-day deadline, that's it. Buyers can get out, they get their money back. And that's different again. The buyer just has to be, they don't even have to say why they're unsatisfied with the inspection. They just have to say, I'm unsatisfied. The language is very specific, and this is what's in a feasibility study. The language says the buyer's satisfaction for the buyer's intended purpose in the sole discretion of the buyer. And here it essentially says the same thing. If the results of an inspection are unsatisfactory to the buyer, period. Buyer doesn't have to say anything other than, it's unsatisfactory to me. I'm out. Give me my deposit back. Does everybody understand that distinction or have any questions on that? Because that's a big change. It's a big leap in power to buyers' rights to get out of a contract with a home inspection. Go ahead, Aurelia.
Okay, I do have a question because you were just going over the addendum and you said that we had to put that additional language at the bottom. But what if we didn't have that language at the bottom that covers everything, and we just have marked specific things that we want for inspection, like Darlene was saying about the 2 things that the buyer requested. Okay, can you still say for any reason, or does there have to be any reason for those 2 particular things, or the things that they marked?
Another great,
get a little cookie.
yeah, another great question. If you don't add that language that I gave you, then you're limited, your buyer is only limited to what's been marked. That's it. They can't get out just because they don't like a home inspection. If they've only marked mold, then that's all their contingency is, mold. So by adding that language that we talked about a bit ago, that gives the buyer a reason to get out for anything or everything or nothing. They can just walk. The initial of only one of these items, right, on there, that limits the buyer's right under Section B here, inspection process, to being able to terminate the contract unilaterally for only what's been marked. So we know if you're in a seller's market, are you going to be able to mark everything plus include the language on Section 8? If you're in a seller's market like we were just 6-7 months ago, and everybody is competing over contracts, that you're going to have to explain that issue to your buyers and say, we're in a very competitive market here. If, on the other hand, you're in a buyer's market and sellers are dying for any contracts, you're going to be able to check every box and put the language at Section 8. Make sense? Okay. That was a great distinguishing question, Aurelia, because a lot of people are going to be confused on this. When it starts to come up and buyers are going to want to get out for anything in a home inspection, and they're going to say, well, wait a minute, we can do that under section B, B little I, then you're going to say, well, no, your buyer's only initialed a structural and mechanical or mold or whatever, and this is not a structural or mechanical or mold item. So they cannot get out. Any questions on that? Any follow-up, Aurelia, on that?
No, thank you.
Okay. So you following up on the language and right to terminate, right? The buyer has that right, and it further says the buyer is not required to specify the basis of the buyer's dissatisfaction. That's what we just talked about a minute ago, that the buyer can get out for any reason or no reason and does not have to say what they're dissatisfied with. So let's say you represent the seller, and based upon, it's your listing, and based upon what we just went over on this inspection addendum, going back up to the date of when the inspection and all things have to be done, on paragraph 1, on page 1, if you are a listing agent, do you want more days in that blank or fewer days in that blank? And that's my question to you guys. Based upon what we've just talked about, and you're a listing agent, you get a contract. Go ahead, Margaret.
Fewer days?
Correct. Correct. We want fewer days to give the buyer the right to just walk away and not even tell us as listing agents what the problem was. We don't even get any information and they can walk away. Sellers might be very frustrated with this. So if you're a listing agent, in advance of receiving a contract, you want to make sure that you've had a discussion about home inspections, particularly now that it's really less of a seller's market. And you guys can tell me how things have been developing in the market better than I can, but you would want to put, as a listing agent, fewer days. So maybe negotiate that down, because you don't want your sellers to be hung up on a contract for 7 or 10 days. And then the buyer comes back after the home inspection, says, I'm out, walking away, and they're not even telling you what the issue is. That's what this language now gives the buyer the power and authority under contract to do. So I know it's 1:30, which is my limit. They gave me a hard stop, so I don't want to go beyond that, but I do want to open up the floor to any questions, and then we can continue next week from here on this, particularly this issue of the home inspection, the as-is provisions and how it applies in contracts, and you might be able to, and the new contract, and you might be able to think about some issues or questions, and we could do a mock-up if you want of an actual transaction from the listing side and the buyer side. Anybody have any questions on this so far? Okay, how about any comments on the current market? What are we seeing from your side of the fence? I know interest rates have increased. How's that affecting the market with your buyers and sellers? Thank you, Anita. Anybody have any comments on that who's been working with buyers and sellers here? You know, since the rate increases have been so dynamic and quick. Anybody? Okay.
Darlene's hand is raised.
Yeah, no. All right, well, maybe think about that also for next week's discussion, because I'd love to get your points of view. You guys are on the front line, right? You're seeing and talking to buyers and sellers in the marketplace. How's this interest rate and economy impacting our business, especially from the real estate professional's perspective? Love to have, oh, there's Jasmine. Hi, Jasmine.
Hello,
Jasmine, how
Glenn.
about
Hello,
you?
everybody.
Do you have any comment to wrap up today's discussion on how the interest rate is impacting real estate professionals in your world, you guys being on the front line?
Yes, definitely. Well, first of all, excellent job as always, Glenn. So kudos. We're looking forward to having you back next week to go even deeper into this contract. There have been so many changes, and our Realty pros have been diligent to bring all of those changes to question and all those things. So I said, who better to have as a professional in this regard to walk us through it? So kudos.
Yeah,
And the
my pleasure.
question that pertains to what we're seeing on the front lines, we're seeing a lot of buyers who are just putting a pause on what they were doing while they evaluate what's going on in this current market climate. Buyers who were saying, okay, well, I'm looking to buy, and then their interest rate creeped up, from 5% all the way into 7%, and now above 7%. And the conversations that we're having is more buyer education. So even doing a lot more home buyer seminars to educate them on what interest rates were previously, because for our country, this is not a high for interest rates. It's just high when you consider the last several years or so. But
Right.
as Shay tells people, when he bought his first home, he bought it at like a 13% interest rate. I think you said yours may have been around 18% or something like that.
Just over 16%,
16%
when I bought. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And we know people who purchased way above that. So historically in our country, 7% is just not high, but it is just a completely different climate than what we're used
Right.
to. So we're having the conversation about continuing to educate our buyers and letting them know whether interest rates are high or not, all of the benefits that they get from home ownership far outweigh the hike. So on the listing side, we're seeing fewer offers because the buyers that were previously qualified for maybe a $2,500 mortgage, now that same mortgage is going to be like $3,500 with the interest rate hike. So we're seeing fewer offers there. We see some of our sellers adjusting their prices, and some of the sellers considering what those concessions may be. So whether it's a price drop right offhand, or whether it's offering buyers incentives or credits and things of that nature. And sellers they're wondering what's going on with such a drastic change. And what we're having to do is to assure people that though we've seen this sharp change in our market, it's not anything like what we've seen before, because this one is being strategically done and forced. So the Fed is strategically hiking the interest rates to cool the market, because there was such appreciation and everything that we experienced over COVID with all of the inflation. People were just, 20, 30, 40 offers on one property, and they're trying to help cool that off and balance it out. So I think it's very important for us to continue to educate people that although we're seeing this shift in the market, it is nowhere near a crash or anything like that. So I think that messaging is imperative for us to make sure we continue to message for all of our clients.
Yeah. That's excellent. And keep in mind for your sellers right now, for FHA and VA loans that are assumable, that sellers had at the 2.5, 2 3/4, 3 1/4, those are now assumable. And they may be very attractive to some buyers who have just a little bit of cash to put into the transaction, and a seller can let that go on an assumption. So I've already given 2 classes on assumptions. We could talk about that at another date whenever you want, Jasmine. Just let me know. And
let's put that on the books, Anita. Do you hear that?
Yeah. Assumptions are going to be a really
I do hear
attractive
that. That
thing
sounds
right
wonderful.
now, especially because rates have gone up so quickly and prices might even be coming down just a little bit. If a seller bought, oh, I'm sorry, Aurelia, go ahead.
I just want to make a comment on assumable loans, because it's funny you just mentioned that. I just talked to a friend of mine. She bought a new home and she wants to sell it, but she bought it at the time that the interest rate was lower. So she said it was suggested that she does an assumable, and her loan is an assumable loan.
Yeah,
So
it's
I'm
a
glad you
great.
brought that up.
We're happy to help you along the way with that, Aurelia. So if you have any questions for your client, feel free to reach out and ask. It's a great option for FHA and VA loans. Even if it was a VA loan, anybody can assume it. It doesn't have to be a veteran. So you can, and because interest rates have gone up so fast and you have values coming down just a little bit, the cash needed in the assumption is not so much that you won't have a lot of buyers who are capable of assuming a loan. It's really an opportune time to start marketing those assumptions to sellers who might think about wanting to get their house on the market, but are scared because of the interest rates. If they have an assumable loan, market that thing, get it out there. It'll be very attractive.
I'm excited to hear you say this, Glenn. This is a conversation that we've already begun. I know Angela's on the line, and we had about it probably a very long couple conversations about that. So we need to bring it to the forefront. Let's get a training scheduled as soon as possible. Let's start to market to those sellers. And we're looking forward to next week, Glenn. Thank you.
All right, guys, have a wonderful holiday. I know they turn the clocks back. It'll be dark by this time next week, whatever.
Awesome. Thanks, Glennis.
All right, I'll see you guys.
Glenn, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Don't worry. It's all right. Thanks. I'll see you guys soon. Talk to you soon.
Okay, Glenn, see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye, Dee.